Voters, not politicians, are just like you. We're citizens. It's a group of citizens that have been working on good government activities and initiatives to reform some of the ethics and voting rights and activities centered around Michigan government. Voters, not politicians was the group back that helped bring Proposal 2 to the ballot in 2018 and put into, and with your votes in Michigan, 61% of Michigan voters enacted Proposal 2 and put into place a constitutional amendment that changes the way redistricting is done in the state of Michigan. So what we're going to cover briefly this evening will be why redistricting matters, what the Redistricting Commission will do, and then start talking about your community and what its needs and interests are, and how your community can make its voice heard in government and in the redistricting process. So the focus isn't on community, but for purposes of this evening and for purposes of the redistricting community, the word community is more than just that traditional home address on your envelopes. It's not just your hometown city, your township, or village. We're going to be focusing on what's called communities of interest. This is a term that's in the constitutional amendment, and it's defined as geographic areas where people have a shared interest. Those are the two key components: a geographic definable area and a shared interest. So some examples will include an ethnic enclave of residents, a historic neighborhood, a watershed, a DDA business district or opportunity zone, or the Wine Growers Association up in Grand Traverse and Leelanau County, for example. That's a geographical definable area where people have a shared interest. So why does redistricting matter? And what is a district? District 101 here. Well, a district is also a geographic area. And as your civics or government 101, each legislative body has one district for every seat. Districts must have the same number of people to support the concept and to fulfill the concept of one person, one vote. So you have voters in a district, and state representatives, state Senate, and in US Congress, we elect one representative to each seat, and they represent us in the respective legislatures in Lansing and in Washington. Districts change, people move around, deaths occur, babies are born, and so over time, districts get out of whack a little bit in terms of the population equivalency. So every 10 years, we undertake a census, and then we utilize that information, census information, to rebalance the districts and to redistrict, to make sure that there's equal number of people in each legislative district. So people then ask, well, why do districts end up looking like this? On the left-hand side, there is the congressional district around southeastern Michigan and Detroit area and northern suburbs. On the right-hand side is a state house district, 76 around Grand Rapids. Why do they end up with these kinds of bizarre shapes and configurations? Well, for the most part, it's because the drawing of district lines has been left to the politicians themselves. And the politicians and their respective political parties have drawn the maps to serve their interests and not necessarily the communities, not necessarily our areas. They've drawn maps that give them a partisan advantage of one type or another, or they've drawn maps that make sure that they incorporate the hometown or the residence of an incumbent, as opposed to simply drawing maps that are contiguous or have a compact and more readily definable shape to them. So historically, over the course of the past century or so, politicians in Michigan and in most states across the country, the districts have been drawn by the partisan interests of the politicians and the political parties themselves. So why is redistricting important? It is, it's our representatives. So redistricting is important because you want your interests to be represented. You don't want to necessarily see your community of interest or your community divided up. You want to get the best representation, people who know your needs, have an appreciation for your concerns. They care about your community. It's hopefully gets, results in better government and programs, and that policies and tax dollars that work better for you and your community. So one thing to think about as you go through the process of either drawing your own communities of interest or working with groups and organizations that reflect a community, well, think about what might your life improve? How might it improve with a different kind of district? So here's, once again, here's some mapping that you can see in southeastern Michigan, a broader geographic representation of the current congressional districts and the state Senate districts. And you can begin to see, if you can follow my cursor a little bit here on the state Senate, districts, they hug you have all the way from the Denby area up in northeastern Detroit, and it stretches all the way down to Grosse Seal. Or here in the congressional districts, down from Delray, it wraps around, goes through southern Oakland County and all the way up to Pontiac. So do the people in West Bloomfield and Pontiac, do they have the same community? Do they have the same kinds of shared interests as individuals in Southwest Detroit? So these are the kinds of concerns that get reflected out and through the redistricting process. So one thing for you to think about with your groups or organizations, think about, are there federal or state issues that could be better addressed if certain geographic areas or environmental features were in one district? If you're concerned about a particular watershed, and you're with the Friends of the Au River, you want somebody, you'd like to have a representative who has a good appreciation, or a state senator who has a good appreciation of those concerns in that watershed. You'd hate to see that the influence of that watershed divided up into multiple districts, and have its impact and its understanding diminish. Or if you're part of an ethnic group or persons of color, do you end up having your neighborhoods or your areas get divided up and your influence less than it ought to be? And so not reflected in state and federal policy issues. So thinking about the issues that would be better reflected and understood if they were in a single district. Here's an example. The Detroit Environmental Agenda, they've identified some of those issues of supporting climate resiliency and improving air quality, water quality, expanding recycling programs, designating places to grow food and have a safer transportation program. So they have a pretty good idea of what some of the policies that they'd like to see their elected officials in Lansing and or in Washington, D.C. represent. And that's the kind of thought process you might want to take with your own community of interest or in communities of interest that you might be working with through the redistricting process. Now let's turn to a little bit of the Redistricting Commission itself. So what will they actually do? One, they draw and approve election district maps. There's 110 districts in the State House of Representatives. Each one of those will have approximately 90,000 people or so. There's 38 state Senate districts. Each one of those will have about 263,000. And there will probably be 13 congressional districts. Michigan will probably lose a congressional district. We currently have 14 congresspersons, just due to the fact that Michigan, relative to other places across the country, we have remained steady with our population or a slight decline. Conversely, other places in the country have gained in population, and to once again retain the balance of the 435 representatives in Congress and population equality, Michigan will most likely lose a seat. But the role of the Districting Commission is to draw and approve those maps. Second role, an important role to help them do that job of the Redistricting Commission, is to gather input. So this is, as I mentioned, through the constitutional amendment, a distinctly different process now. It's not the politicians drawing the maps, it is the Redistricting Commission. To do that, they are bound to gather input, to take testimony, to host, they're required to hold public hearings before and after draft maps are developed. So the timeline is underway. We're working right now. The commission, as I mentioned, they're required to hold at least 10, but they're holding well over 10 meetings before their maps are developed. Under the language of the constitutional amendment, they were supposed to have their map approved by November 1st of 2021, so that the maps could be utilized in the 2022 election cycle. As you probably well know, the census was delayed because of the COVID virus in part, and so the delay has brought with it a delay in the releasing of the census data. Normally, they would have had census data by February and March of this year. Now it's looking like that may be as late as September before they have adequate census data to redraw the maps. The commission is most likely going to appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court and ask them to make an adjustment in this date to be able to comply. But nonetheless, ultimately, the maps have to be approved by the commission, and they will ultimately be utilized in next year's August primary and the November general election. This is not our Zoom meeting. This is the commission's Zoom meeting. And part of the interest in showing this is to say a word or two about the commissioners. But the fact is, it reflects the fact that you can you can participate. This is a public meeting. The redistricting is going to be done in public, not behind a closed door in the proverbial smoke-filled room. The commission comprises 13 members. There are 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 5 individuals who are members of minor parties or completely independent, non-affiliated individuals. Under the terms of the constitutional amendment, they have to reach a consensus to approve their maps. That means there has to be at least 2 people, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 2 of the independents to vote in favor of a map before it can be adopted and put into place. It takes a consensus across the all lines to be able to move forward with the process. The constitutional amendment did put into place a ranked order of the priorities that the commission will need to follow. And they include the compliance with the Voting Rights Act and federal laws. This is not only the concept of one person, one vote, but also includes there cannot be any discrimination on the basis of race or language in the drawing of districts. The districts need to be contiguous. They can't be isolated portions and pockets in one location and then added to another that is not contiguous to it. The third highest criteria is communities of interest need to be considered in the mapping. 4 and 5, there can be no particular advantage to a political party or a particular candidate or an existing incumbent in the drawing of the maps by the commission, and the existing boundaries that generally to the best of their ability, existing boundaries of cities and villages and townships need to be respected as best as possible, and they should be reasonably compact. They shouldn't be this snake-shaped kind of activities that we saw in a couple of those examples. Our focus for your efforts and further discussion tonight, communities of interest, as how do we get that identified and how do we get their voices and your voices heard in the process. So once again, what is a community of interest? You know, it is a geographical definable area that has shared interests. They might be economic. As I said, it could be a business district. It could be a growers association, or maybe it's a cultural, maybe it's an ethnic enclave. Maybe it's a historical area or other kind of shared or environmental shared interest, not defined by political party affiliation or any kind of loyalty to any particular candidate or elected official, a shared interest. Each of us probably have a number of potential communities of interest. Here's a couple of examples of just one individual who, a fictitious individual, lives in Detroit, who happens to be a tribal citizen in the Pokagon Band, but they're also a renter in a neighborhood, Detroit's East English Village. They have an educational community of interest. They're a teacher at Mumford. They have interested in the activities of the Detroit School District. They have a recreational community of interest. They're a cyclist and they support, pathways or the preservation of the riverfront, or the expansion of the riverfront. So any individual may have multiple communities of interest. What's important is for your voice and your map to be put together and to help the commission shape the new lines and to have those voices heard. And by the way, I see a couple of comments popping up in the chat. Given that I'm full screen, I can't see what they are right away, but as soon as I get to them, I'll get to them. But let's map the community. There are tools out there. Representable is a tool that we'll be looking at a little bit later tonight. There's also a very similar tool called Districtor.org, or you can use a sheet of paper and a pencil to draw maps. You could use Google Maps. You could use a AAA map and a magic marker. So the tools, it's not critical as to the tool that you used. It's critical that you define or provide an identification of your geographic interest. And it's important that you describe what that interest is and tell the commission about your community. So here's some of those examples, whether it be Google Maps or Representable, paper and pencil utilization. Here's like a AAA map that shows just west of Brighton. If you were in the area west of Brighton and you happen to be resident of the vicinity around Crooked Lake and you're concerned about all the the watershed and the water quality in that area, it can be as simple as this. The commission has an outline. There is not a requirement that that mapping be done in any particular, utilizing any particular format. They will accept, as I say, maps in any format and descriptions that describe your community. So the question for you and the groups that you work with is that, can you identify those geographic areas where you'd like to have a greater influence with state or federal representatives. And here's another example. And many times groups and organizations will already have some of that mapping activity already done. As I mentioned, the example of a DDA, a business district, they've got defined boundaries. A watershed council, most all of them have a pretty good idea as to the geographic area of inclusion within that watershed. Or here is a group that works in Southwest Detroit, the Delray neighborhood. They've identified what their neighborhood is and some of the policies and areas of interest, that they have. So it's important to make your map known, focus in and concentrate on drawing your community. There is not a requirement to draw a district. You don't have to come up with the boundaries of the 236,000 state Senate district. Your focus should be on making sure that your community of interest is identified, geographically represented, and together with a narrative, so that you can describe what makes up those shared interests and why it's important that it be together in a particular district configuration. So what you can do next, meet with your community members, talk about those issues that are of interest to your community, discuss the location. What are the landmarks? What is the story of your community? Utilize Representable or another mapping tool, and then submit your community description and your map to the commission. You can plan on attending one of the public hearings that are coming up, or you can follow along online. The commission meetings are all posted through the Secretary of State's office. So the commission is waiting for you to take some of these next steps and next actions. Here's a look at some of the upcoming they've set the public hearing dates for when the commission is going to be conducting public hearings. Not all of the venues have been selected as of yet. So you can see that there's, up in the Lansing area coming up in May. In this presentation, we highlighted some of the Detroit area ones, but there's also, scattered throughout the state. If you have a question or if you want some additional support in conducting a community town hall or possibly a community mapping workshop, support at votersnotpoliticians.com. Sending a message will get picked up and contact will be made. There is the votersnotpoliticians.com/COI. That website has these kinds of slide presentations, just like I've made this evening. And there's also some other tools and other information about redistricting and the redistricting process that are available on that website. So let me stop my share and see if I can pick up on a couple of other comments, or was there any particular questions?
This was great, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, sorry if that felt rushed. I'm sorry.
It's great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dan, you can go ahead.
Hey, and it's all good. Thank you so much for giving this presentation. I thought it was really informative, and just thank you for being here with us tonight. One question that came to mind was, you mentioned how it's very possible that Michigan is very likely to lose a seat. And what I'm curious about is what happens to that representative who originally was actually representing that district? Do they get assigned to somewhere else, or do they just lose their job?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit like musical chairs. you know, that there used to be 14 chairs and now there might be 13. And so what happens on some occasion, oftentimes through the redistricting process, let me take a half step back. Believe it or not, in the 1960 congressional elections, Michigan had 19 representatives. And so we're down to 14, soon to be 13. So what frequently happens in this is that you end up with two representatives, two Congress people who happen to live in the same vicinity now, and within the same district. And they can choose to run against each other, or sometimes Congress people will change their address. They will physically move. You know, maybe it's possible, for example, that they actually, you know, that their former district incorporated more of a geographic area that didn't get, maybe to the west of them, that didn't get brought into the district where they physically live now. And so they may change their address and choose to move. So sometimes people choose this as an opportunity to step down and retire. There's a variety of different scenarios that will see itself played out. You'll see, it won't surprise me if you see a couple of districts maybe with no incumbent within that particular geographic area. And so some people will move, some people will choose to run against each other.
Thank you so much.
Is this where can we as community members follow the process, including the Zoom link? You could do you could go to the Secretary of State's website, or simply Google search Michigan Citizens Redistricting Commission, and they have a whole separate website and web page, and the information regarding how to access their Zoom meetings, and the information regarding how to access their Zoom meetings and how to participate will be forthcoming on, or if not already, up on their website. Oh, somebody else I see just put up, Ellen put up a little bit of information about yes, that's the source of that interview. Thank you, Ellen. Yep. Other questions? Oh, how will the delayed census numbers wreak havoc on the plan? Well, you know, it will crunch at the end, is basically what you're sort of expecting to happen. Now, you know, for the most part, we know that Michigan still has, you know, 9,800,000 people for the most part, and that's not too far away from where we were 10 years ago. So the commission can start to play around and start to do some of their homework and get a good idea as to how those districts might take shape and be formulated, and where some of those boundary lines might take place. And then when the census data comes through, then it will largely be a matter of fine tuning those district lines. The population variable gets to be a little bit challenging, because on congressional districts, the population variation between districts is 1% or less. But in state house and state representative districts, they can be as variable as about 10%. So you could have a state house district that's as few as 90,000. You could have a state representative district that has 108, 110,000 people in them. But the short answer is they'll probably do a good deal of the work in advance of the census data coming through, and then fine tune their maps, and then put them out for public hearing and public comment. Other questions that I didn't see or other folks had? So Noah, do you want to move into redistrictor, representable, or?
Yeah, okay, so we can move on to that part. So thank you, first of all, Jim, for that presentation. Very informative. I think it's super important, especially as students, and I mean, Michigan State even more especially because we do as students, I feel like, and not so much other places, like live in these neighborhoods around the campus.
Right.
And a lot of our campus is like nature area. So we live in these neighborhoods. So it's definitely important for like student voices to get kind of separated from the like adults who are living here. I mean, like in the house I live in, like my voting district, my polling place was in a retirement, like old people's home,
Okay.
and I'm a student. So I feel like something like that kind of can be fixed by this process. We can all be like represented.
Well, let me challenge you a little bit and use your example. I hear, the interest that you're expressing, but I also then challenge you or to think about, well, what are the state policies or the state laws? What's your state interest in having a district, a geographical, student defined area? Are there specific student, federal policies or state policies that you'd like to see better reflected if you were, if you had a district that reflected your community of interest?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That is a great question to think about. Like having more like resources for the college. And I mean, like even this process, like every year we go through this like voter friendly campus process. I feel like that would be a lot easier with help from the
Yep.
state if we had that like district for students.
Now, I certainly know in some of the interests and some of the, for example, I spent 23 years working at the University of Michigan. I know, I have a pretty good sense of a lot of, student-based and campus-based interests, and oftentimes they are locally focused. What the local ordinances are, what's going on in what the East Lansing City Council is adopting, not as much as Congress or State House. In Ann Arbor, if you ever took a look at the city council districts in Ann Arbor, they're what I would call, they're cracked, or what is termed cracked, that they take the student population and they divide it like a pie. And so therefore student voices are diluted because, the student voice is only a small portion of each district, as opposed to if student voices and student neighborhoods were all incorporated into a single city council district, then there would almost assuredly be a student voice on the city council. I mean, that's a local example of the impact of districting and redistricting, but it nonetheless it brings home the point.
Yeah, that's really great. Really a lot of good information being shared.
Okay.
Before we move on to the representable tool, Michael asks, is this presentation somewhere online? Or I know we're going to be sharing the recording later, but is the presentation anywhere?
That if the presentation for the most part is available at that Voters Not Politicians /COI, Communities of Interest. So Voters Not Politicians /COI. And there's a number, there's a number of slide presentations. But if there was a particular slide in my presentation that, Michael or others were interested, Noah, you can reach back out to me and I'm happy to, to send it along.
Awesome. Okay. So the next portion, we've kind of got a little less time than we were planning, but that's totally okay. So we actually are trying to, this link I put in the chat is this tool that we've been talking about, Representables, you can actually go in and submit your own personal testimony for your community, and you can choose like where your community is on the map. And everyone who uses this link, like it'll take the like part of all the maps that we submit, like the middle part, so it's like one community. Is that correct?
Yes. Do you want me to open up Representable and share the screen on that?
Yes, yeah, that would be great.
Let's see if I can, and if this is an existing map, I don't know. Let's see. Okay. This may be less than full screen at the moment, but let me, yeah, Representable makes you jump through a couple of hoops to get started. And selecting your state, and it gives you information about, about Michigan and the redistricting process and how it can help and the criteria. Let's start mapping. I've already got a login. They want us to tell you about ourselves. There we go. Put your name in, and that's what's our community of interest. Now, I don't know if I put that website in, Noah, does that take me right to where that place you started before?
Yeah, so what it is that I've put in the chat is our community drive. So that's a function of Representable that lets all of our own individual maps come together in different layers on one map. Yes, he's organized by MSUvote, so you can scroll down and you can give your own personal testimony, draw my community. I definitely recommend at some point looking around with that. It's honestly, it's kind of fun. And like they submit that to the committee, I'm pretty sure, which is amazing. So you're like, you specifically are contributing to this process.
So yes, as Noah points out, you can pull your maps together and overlay them. Let's see. There's some guiding questions that that help you. Yep, it looks like it's okay. So then this begins to give you a look. And I'm sorry if this is duplicative, Noah, or is this helpful information for others who maybe haven't seen it before?
No, I think this is helpful for sure, like to get to see this.
And the difference between districtor works pretty much the same way as Representable does. Representable uses census blocks. These are census blocks, and census blocks, they can contain anywhere from 600 people to 3,000 people. So it gets to be a little bit difficult if you're really working hard on a population. It can also be a bit of a challenge if you're working in a particular neighborhood and wanting to, because the information, it's all almost like it's preset for you, and you can, if you're trying to create a district. Oh, I should unclick this area because it won't allow you to do non-contiguous districts. So sometimes, Representable, it won't give you as good of a choice. Well, geez, this would be that area. Here's a student housing area here in between Michigan Avenue and Grand River, but this area up by Saginaw, this is an area that wouldn't be as interested. It's only a partially a shared interest. So they don't give you that flexibility to exclude areas that aren't in a particular census block. You sort of take the whole census block with you. So it is one of the challenges, but the tool itself is relatively intuitive. You click on an area, and it keeps, I keep on getting the non-contiguous. I don't know, or maybe somebody started in Okemos. So, all right. So you can you always have to click on a contiguous area. And if you do click in an area that isn't contiguous to the area that you had shaded, it'll pop up and give you the warning. It can't contain that kind of gap. And then there's certain tools that are available here. As was mentioned, you can save your map, and then you can overlay that with other maps of other individuals. Let's see. There's the glossary there. Now, Districtor, the difference between Districtor and Representable is that Districtor uses voting precinct information. So they have some of the a more finite breakdown than Representable does, and it also has some tools in Districtor that give you some of the 2010 population information, as well as some, in many cases, racial backgrounds or ethnic breakdowns to the district that you're attempting to create. Questions about, let me stop the share for a moment. Any particular questions about Redistrictor?
I have a general question. So how does students like living here every 4 years and kind of moving out of East Lansing affect the census? Is that kind of just something that's already predictable, that there's always going to be this influx of students every kind of 4 years, or every 2 years is going to be a lot of move-ins and move-outs? Or is it something that is constantly shifting, like borders, I guess?
Well, let me make sure I answer your question, and let me approach it this way. So first of all, the census is taken, where you are residing on theoretically on April 1st of 2020. And so students are somewhat unique population, is that you can say, I am a resident of East Lansing. I was living in the dorm, or I was living in an apartment here in East Lansing on April 1st of 2020, and that's where I'm filling it out. You can also, many students oftentimes will be identified as a resident in their home, and at their home location, where at their parents' place or at another location. So for census, for census purposes and for the redistricting purposes and the population balancing, the census data that was collected on April 1st of 2020, and the people who resided there, that's the population count. So yes, as individuals, yeah, you will be in a different location, in a couple of years, but nonetheless, that census figure for that population that was taken on April 1st of 2020, that will be utilized and be the basis of redistricting for 10 years. Did I address your question?
Yeah, that's interesting to know. I didn't really know how the influx of students would affect population and how lines are drawn. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's an issue every 10 years. And I think, and maybe we'll speak to it more directly, but many residents were able to submit their housing list in April this year because of the pandemic, or last year because of the pandemic. So I know many campuses, including like CMU, just took their census of their campus and submitted that number for census. But historically, students are undercounted. They're a known undercounted population because you are transient, for lack of a better term. And so that's a great question.
Yeah, and you're busy doing other things than waiting for a form or looking for somebody to take a head count.
Yeah, we had a few people come to our door a few times asking if certain people lived at the house, and it's a rental unit. So like there's there were people asking like for 3 years ago, like, is this person still living here? And it's like, I have no clue.
Other questions? Happy to try to help out.
To that point a little bit, you can submit multiple maps. So if you're really having fun in Representable or Districtor,
Correct.
it is, as Noah said,
Yep.
pretty fun.
Yep.
Map multiple communities. If you're a part of a group that is represented in multiple places, draw those maps. And I think it's really key that you know, not just student housing areas, but also student recreation areas and areas that you spend outside and places where you go to learn, and those things are also represented.
And also keep in mind, just as you can, you know, there will be other people submitting maps as well. And so there's going to be competing maps and competing communities of interest. And it'll be some hard work for the commission to sort out, well, geez, you know, Southwest Detroit, this is an area that has a lot of environmental concerns, a lot of factories down that way, a lot of air pollution. But yet, you know, there's also a Hungarian neighborhood down that way, and what should be included in, or a Hispanic and Mexican town? Well, should that be in the same district as the environmental concern, or, you know, what about the schools and that neighborhood? So there will be some work on the part of the commission to sort out and prioritize. And which communities of interest will, but you don't hit but it's one of those things that your voice isn't involved at all if you don't submit a map. So get your map and get your community described and get it submitted.
Yeah, that's amazing. But if we don't have any other questions, well, if you didn't get to ask your question also, definitely go to some of those websites. There's a lot of great information out there. Thank you again so much, Jim, for that presentation. That was like amazing. I love the representable information as well.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap up here for a bit, but I know Langston was gonna give a little few closing comments. Langston, if you want to come on.
Hey, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Langston Smith, and I'm an intern with MSUvote. Currently, we're exploring the possibility of creating a registered student organization under the umbrella of MSUvote. Students in this organization would work with other MSU students to plan and run different voter education events, as well as work with the larger MSUvote coalition to plan events like this one tonight and other outreach opportunities, both at MSU and in the East Lansing community. So if you are interested in potentially joining this RSO when we create it, please reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat, and I look forward to hearing from you guys who are interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know I've talked to a couple of people before the meeting. I know Zoe's really interested in joining that. So hopefully we can get that going. But thank you all for your time so much. I really loved having you. And have a great night.
Thank you, Noah, for putting this on. This was amazing.
Thank you for coming. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.